understand the mystery. First take a look at the history. The words we use will give us clues. So join us now in Church Chatter.
Welcome to the Church Chatter podcast, where we unpack a different church word or phrase each week. I'm Dillon. I have a Master of Divinity, and I'm an ELCA Lutheran pastor.
I'm Sam. I have my doctorate in language and culture, and I study religious linguistics. Today it's episode 20, and the word today is love, which is appropriate for a couple reasons. First, Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so we thought it would be a good time to talk about the word love in the context of church, the Bible, Christianity, Greek. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, but also, if you can't tell in my voice, I've been sick all week. I go to the doctor in 2 hours to figure out maybe what this is, but in sickness and in health is
Oh, very good.
There's something related to love there. It's very much been in sickness this week, right?
It has.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
hopefully in health soon.
Yes, so I have tea, I have cough drops here, so hopefully that gets me through. I am feeling a little better today, though, so we put this off. Usually we do this a couple days ago, but we're doing it today. So, today the word is love, and don't worry, this episode isn't going to be just about, like, love, mushy, gushy, love each other, and we're also not going to be super cliche, although it will come up. It's not all about, like, love your neighbor. Although, yes, for sure, that's part of Christianity, but we're really going to get into the nitty-gritty and talk about how our understandings of love and that word love culturally change how we understand some biblical texts, talk about our limited understandings of love. I don't know what Dylan has planned, but we're going to get into it. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the word love in the New Testament. So the New Testament, let me take a sip of my tea, hold on. Okay, so the New Testament was written in Greek originally, and in the Greek language, there are 4 words that get translated into English as love. So let's break those down. I've heard these pronounced a lot of ways. Yeah. I'm just going to pronounce, so if you've heard them pronounced different ways, I've heard, like, very credentialed scholars pronounce them very different ways, but here we go. So the first one is storge. Storge is the affection between people who are close or kin, so you can think like a parent and a child. That love in the Greek language is storge. So again, we just have this one word love, but in the Greek language they have 4 different words for these different kinds of loves.
Which I wish we had in English.
Right. When I say I love French fries and I love my children and I love my husband, those are 3 very different things, but we only have one word for it, which is really telling about our culture, right? It's very interesting. So in the Greek language, there's storge. This is the affection between people who are close to each other. Think about pets, right? The way we love our pet. This falls under the umbrella, which is storge is still really big, right? Because storge is how we feel about pets and maybe even nature, right? It's also how a parent might feel between, like, a parent-child relationship. That's storge. So storge, it's not a given, right? It's not inherently there. It requires something from us. So a parent loves a child. This is storge, right? Because this is within the context of culture and biology. It's expected, right? There's something biological about it. There's something culturally kind of required. A parent is supposed to love their child. Also, loving our children, loving our pet, it satisfies a need within us, right? If that makes sense. If you love your pet, you know that you don't love your pet just selflessly. It also does something for you. I love my children, but also it fills something in me, right? So we get something out of it. It satisfies a need, an emotional need of our own. Something really important with storge, Dylan, you can jump in anytime if you have thoughts, but a child, as they get older, they don't necessarily benefit from expressing storge or this love to a parent as they get older. Parents, so let's kind of relate this to a Bible. This is something that Dylan and I talk about a lot. There is, in the New Testament, or Old Testament, in the 10 Commandments, it says that you should, is it honor or obey? I hear it both ways, both
Well,
translations.
it's usually obey,
Obey
but the
your
more modern
parents.
understanding has been, well, no, let's be specific.
Yeah.
It says obey your father and your mother, because that's how they understood things.
Yeah.
And then there has been an expansion in terms of what exactly does the Hebrew word obey mean? Could it mean honor? And there is an expansion there. And then there's even more of an expansion, because we see families of all different types of understandings and ways. Is that some of the newer understandings of the Ten Commandments is honor your parents, because not everyone has a mother and a father.
Right.
So honoring your parents, or honoring those who take care of you.
Right.
Because there might be a grandparent, it might be an aunt and or uncle, it might be. So it's not everyone has biological parents who are taking care of them.
Yes.
And loving them and caring for them.
Yeah, and that falls under this storge kind of, this Greek philosophy, this Greek consciousness of storge kind of love between a parent and a child. So the Ten Commandments says that a child should obey or honor their parents. However, people forget about this. The Bible also says that parents should not exasperate their children, right? So this falls under this storge kind of love, because it's not just a given that your children should love and obey you and honor you and respect you. You have to do something. This kind of love you need to earn, right? You need to, if you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table and you're making fun of your child, or maybe even worse, you're not even letting your child exist, you're making them be quiet, what makes you think that your child's going to grow up to respect and honor you, right? So this kind of love between a parent and a child, or even like a pet, falls under this too, or siblings, right? A brother and a sister. As we all know, not all siblings grow up to be close and to love each other in this storge kind of way, because this kind of love has to be earned by all parties involved. So that's the first kind of love. This kind of love requires not just labor for someone, like a parent labors for a child. It also requires respect and a deep sense and expression that your child, no matter what age, is a human that is deserving of seriousness and is not pushed away or silenced. And this love is subject to jealousy, right? I mean, so our kids are 4 and 2. I keep talking about children. This can be siblings. It's usually not friends. It's usually like siblings, a parent, a child, a pet. Even sometimes
it's arguably not friends at all.
Yeah, there's a whole, we're going to talk about that. It's not really friends at all. But I'm trying, maybe step parents, see, some of these things, there can be overlap. And C.S. Lewis, when in his book on 4 loves, where he talks about these 4 different kinds of loves in the Greek language and Greek kind of consciousness and thought and philosophy, which again is what the New Testament is rooted in, that language. He talks about how with culture changing, it can be messier a little bit. Like these lines can be blurred.
Well, right, but, and even we have to be very mindful too in thinking about when, especially as we talk about the topic of love and a multitude of different types of love. Love also fosters care, and one of the interesting things in the ancient world was when it came to love. So we have in the 10 Commandments, we have honor your father or mother, or honor your parents, or honor those who take care of you. There most definitely has to be an expansion of that once again, because in many cases it was the care for the children and the love for the children was not just between the parent and the child, or the mother and father of the child, or whatever the
sister
case,
and brother.
But also there was midwives who were caring for children. There was I always find this weird, but wet nurses who were caring,
grandparents.
Yeah. So when we honor the elder or honor the aging, and those who love us and take care of us, that goes. It's not changing the scriptures or changing the 10 Commandments. It is an expansion of God's love and care that is seen in people who are caring for us that even go beyond our parents.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I don't want to undermine this type of love because it's very important. I mean,
It's deeply important.
Yeah, this kind of love has a depth to it. It's necessary for survival, right? You think about children. Human children could not survive without somebody loving them for many years, right? They need for many years somebody to feed them and clothe them and all of these things. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, I hear this pronounced so many ways. Philia?
Philia.
Yeah, that's how I say it. I've heard it a couple ways. But philia is the friendship kind of love. This one requires similar interests. This is the big thing for philia. So you think about a parent and a child, or a brother and a sister when they're growing up, and if they're close even after that, or like a grandparent and a grandchild, like these kinds of storge loves, right? They require service back and forth, a caring for one another, right? A respect for one another. Philia is less about caring for each other, and it's more about having, like, looking outward at the same thing. It's a lot about having a similar interests more than affection and gazing at each other. It's more a side-by-side relationship than like a back-and-forth relationship, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So philia is not universal, especially in our time and culture. So you need storge, right? Like, children wouldn't survive without it. Philia, though, increasingly so, is not seen. Philia is not an acquaintance, to be clear. It's not just somebody you know who you occasionally have meals with. Philia is a deep sense of friendship. You have something in common. So this kind of love is not, there's not a biological pull, right? Like this, like a grandparent or a parent or a sibling where you feel like, ooh, like drawn to this person somehow because of biology. And I don't even say that just in like a, oh, you gave birth to this person. I even mean like adoption. Even cousins can kind of fall into that thing, right? It's just like this close kinship. Philia is a deep friendship of somebody you're not related to and you have a similar interest. So that's key. You have to have something deeply in common to, like, I think of book clubs. Some people gather around like a genre of a book that they read together, and they really have these deep relationships because they like to read, or because they go to the same church, or because they have something in common. Go ahead.
Yeah, you also see this philia, friendship, love, in denominations that are, although separate denominations, they still have common themes, and they work together. So like the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church, although two different denominations, they have philia, friendship, in that they have common goals that they work on parallel to each other, side by side. You also see this in civic organizations where you might have the Rotary Club and the Lions Club. They're two different civic organizations, and yet they come together to work to do different types of things in the community. They share that friendship.
Yeah.
Or like the Elks Club and the Moose Lodge or something like that.
A common cause, a common worldview, a common hobby, just something in the space between them that is a shared interest, or I don't like the word passion, but passion or goal or something like that, right? So again, this kind of love, there's no biological pull. It doesn't give us, it's a very calm kind of love. It doesn't give us those like spurts of oxytocin where your heart beats fast. It doesn't give you like that mother-child kind of like oxytocin, I love you so much, like whenever a child's just born, right? It doesn't give you any of that. And in Greek culture and ancient culture, male friendship, that was a huge part of philia, right? Now we, especially in the United States, in our culture, I feel bad for men because having deep male friendships, our culture really works against it. But for much of history, male friendship included touching and kissing and hugging. That's philia, right? Friendship can be quite a physical thing. Touching, hugging, kissing. Whenever you're sad, like holding somebody, embracing them.
Obviously,
and think of Jesus kissed men in the Bible. We know that he kissed a lot of people.
There's
right?
a very, very old tradition of the holy kiss. Now that,
no, can I say something? He was not Greek. Just to be clear, he was not Greek. But so it's not just Greek culture, right? Men throughout a lot of ancient history up until...
Well, you still see this in Europe and the Middle East.
Yeah. Italians.
And this... and for people who might be thinking like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? This is getting a little weird. This type of philia friendship or philia love, or sometimes like brotherly love or sibling love, sometimes known as. This is a platonic, non-romantic connection between two people of the same sex, two women or two men. This is not a sexual attraction or a sexual love. This is a commonality, a friendship that can be deeply emotional and yet also deeply physical in connecting. But this is not a sexual attraction.
Yes.
Type of a love.
Yeah, and women have still maintained this. Women are a little better at like holding each other and hugging and kissing on the cheek, right? Because our culture doesn't think that's a problem, but for men to do that it's being pushed away. But this is a depth of the human experience, this philia kind of love, right? Did you have something to say?
Oh no, I was just going to say, especially in the United States, I mean that form of philia friendship, especially between males, is seen as suspect, and yet for almost the rest of the world, that I don't know if I would call it commonplace, but I might be able to say it's commonplace. It's something that has always existed, and there's nothing odd or weird about it. You know?
I remember whenever I was in high school, we had a foreign exchange student from Italy. His name was Davide, and he became a friend of mine, and he was a very touchy individual, and that was my first kind of exposure to, he wasn't a man, I mean, he was like 17, but like a young man, a kid, but just a male being like, he would just touch people on the shoulder, just that kind of stuff, but that's very cultural, and it's related to philia, right?
Well, I mean, I did 2 study abroads in Germany, and the German culture, although not necessarily,
they're much more stoic.
They're much more stoic and usually not affectionate, and yet it is very, very common in Germany, especially even though they have a stoic culture, for 2 men when they greet each other to do the double kiss on the cheek. It doesn't necessarily have to be touching the skin, but even just the double kiss, that is a very, very common thing. And there's nothing. Yeah.
Well, before I say this next part, I just a little like disclaimer is, and I hope you can follow this. If you're somebody who's interested in culture or DNA at all, I think you'll understand what I'm saying. But DNA and our brain, let me just start with this. Our brain is a cultural organ. We know this. Our culture shapes our brain, and our brain shapes our culture. It is hard to know when people are like, that's not biological, that's not natural. What people are doing is drawing a false line between culture and how humans arrange our lives and what is true in nature. But newsflash, human culture is part of nature. We are not separate from it. So wrap your brain around that, because we know with epigenetics in the past couple decades, people have been exploring epigenetics. Our behavior changes our DNA. The way we act in the world and our culture and what we are exposed to at a cultural level changes our DNA and changes the shape and texture and like neuroplasticity of our brain is impacted, right? I didn't phrase that right with the neuroplasticity, but
I was going to say neuroplasticity. Wow,
it's related to neuroplasticity.
Right.
Neuroplasticity. Well, we won't go, maybe for another episode. Yeah. But all of it is related. So I'm about to talk about these things, but I'm not making an argument that some things are natural and not natural, because some of it's cultural, some of it's biological, and it's nearly impossible to draw a straight line and figure out what's what, because it's all so intertwined. So for much of history, so I think about my life right now, a majority of my time is spent with Dillon and my children. That is not true for most of humans. If I was born just a few hundred years ago, for majority of history, women spent more time with other women than anybody else, than with their children, than with their husbands. I would have spent most of my time laboring and even my free like recreational time with other women. So there's something deeply cultural about this philia, about friendship. Men would not, they would have spent very limited time with their wives, with their partners. they would have spent most of their time with other men. So this has a deep kind of effect on our DNA and our brain. We know this. So there's this quote from C.S. Lewis, right? It says, "Heaven protect me from the men who need only women and the women who need only men."
Ooh,
and I
that's
kind of love
interesting.
that. Yeah. So, and this is coming from somebody, I really struggle with the concept of like a women's group or a men's group, because the segregation of the sexes has been used to oppress in the past. So I struggle to know when it's appropriate to have like a women's group or a men's group. But I think there is a time and place, and I don't know what the answer is for that, but I think there is a time and a place. I know that I need my female friendships. They do something for me that other relationships can't. But talking about gender, it's tricky. But know that I don't mean this is only a biological thing. So much of it is cultural, and it's impossible sometimes to know where the line is because these things coexist. But in the world of child psychology, there's something really interesting. In childhood, so my girls, they're 2 and 4 right now, and they play with any kid. Boy, girl, whatever, it doesn't matter. They just play with any kid. There's almost no difference to them. But in the world of child psychology, there is an age where little girls start to be drawn to other little girls and boys start to want to play with little boys. Again, biological, cultural, I don't care. I mean, I do, but I don't care about making the difference. It happens. And in our home, we don't push Barbies and dolls or dumpster trucks. We just say, here's all of it, right? So culture for sure shapes some of that, and sometimes it can be problematic, but nevertheless, we live in a world where at a certain age, and I forget what that age is, but little kids start to become aware and they want friendships with boys and girls. Right. So in Greek consciousness, oftentimes this friendship, this philia, it is talked about in conjunction with people of your own sex, which is something interesting and not without merit, right? It should be criticized sometimes, but also it's not without merit. Sure. So these friendship between the sexes, it depends on how society is structured. So a huge part of this is so remember with philia, the huge thing is you need to have something in common. If you live in a culture where men are educated and their work is separate from women, it makes sense. Like, it's going to be difficult for a man to have similar interests to a woman because they aren't in school together. They don't work together. Like, how are they going to have a similar interest, right? But in our culture, we see men and women in the same spaces. So I think that we're starting to see more and more this philia being between men and women. Like, a man and a woman can have a close friendship because they work together, so they have a common goal. Or churches and religious institutions, not all of them are separated. Like, you don't have to sit with men or women. It's not separated in that way. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the huge thing about philia. It's not just companionship. It's deeper than this. It requires something like a commonality, a common goal, a common objective, a common hobby, a common interest that you focus on together. It is not jealous. Unlike a lot of the other types of love, it's not jealous, but it does desire acceptance. And friendship can expose our morals. So this philia in Greek consciousness, people tend to bond over similar outlooks and morals. So friendships can easily bring you up or down. So when we feel like our morals are not aligned with our so-called friends, this is why this kind of love can break or even feel impossible. At some level, this love cannot last when morals are misaligned within a friend group. So there is some truth to, like, you are who your friends are, because you can't have a certain set of morals and then hang out with a bunch of friends who think very differently from you and not be shaped by that in some level. That's the belief surrounding this love, this philia. It's different from storge because, I mean, my 2 daughters, they could grow up to think very differently from me and I still love them. Mm-hmm. I have to cough, so we're going to pause for a minute. Okay, we're back. So we've got storge, we've got philia. The next one is eros. This is romantic love. We're not going to dwell on this because everybody knows about it. Falling in love, marriage. This kind of love begins with a major preoccupation concerning the other person. Obsession, right? You're thinking about the person. You have a racing heart. There's chemicals coursing through your nervous system. Just major falling in love, right?
Well, and this
I'm sorry.
this type of love, the romantic love or the eros love, is one that when most people think, when they hear the word love, at least in kind of Western culture, then they think about love, that's kind of where their mind goes. Or they go to like, a romantic comedy movie that they just watched, or a heart-filled box of chocolates and roses. Or going to a fun wedding or something like that. So a lot of times when we talk about love, we think of Valentine's love.
Yeah.
Type of a thing.
And
real quick, and the next one that we're going to talk about is also the same. We really, a lot of times we only focus on eros, and then the other one we don't talk about philia. We don't talk about storge. We kind of have almost those two types of loves have just kind of
so
they're there, but they've almost dissipated in our conversations.
Yeah. Eros is romantic love. I'm so sorry. Okay. The fourth one is agape. I've heard it pronounced agape, but that is not how I pronounce it. C.S. Lewis pronounces it agape, but I pronounce it agape. That's how I've heard everyone else pronounce it. How do you pronounce it?
Agape.
Yeah.
Also, C.S. Lewis is wonderful, and I love him, but he did not study Greek.
True. Not many people do, though.
No. Well, I did in seminary, but...
Okay, agape. Agape is God's love for us and our love for neighbor. This type of love this is just the foundation of it all. Unconditional. Unlike the other types of love, right? So if you remember, storge requires like a brother and a sister, or a sister and a sister, or a father and son, or a father and daughter, or a mother and daughter, or whatever. This kind of mutual back and forth give and take. Philia requires a similar interest or set of beliefs about the world, or a goal. Eros is romantic love, which we all know everything that requires. We could do a whole episode just on that. Agape is unconditional. This is the kind of love that God has for us, and this is the kind of love that we should have for our neighbor. And neighbor means everybody. It's unconditional. It does not matter. It does not matter what they did. We love them. Period. Full stop.
That also, hard to hear, but that also includes God.
What do you mean?
So agape is God's love for us and our
how
love,
we should love
and our
God.
love
Right,
for
right.
our neighbor. But that love, God's going to love us unconditionally, whether we love God or not.
Yeah.
And yet that agape love calls us to be in relationship with God through love. Again, God's love is unconditional, but it's our response. It's the triad.
Yeah.
God's love comes to us, or goes to our neighbor, and flows back to God.
Go back and listen to our episode on kenosis, and it will explain how this works. It's this constant self-emptying. If we get our ego out of the way, we are filled up with God's love, and then it becomes very easy to love everybody else unconditionally the way God loves us. Some people picture this as a water wheel, and that's helpful, where a water wheel just constantly is emptying itself and then refilling with God's love, right? The water is God's love. Or I picture it sometimes like a cup. If I can get my ego out of the way, I picture a cup with like a big rock in it. My ego is the rock. Take the rock out, and then God can fill water in the cup, and then it's overflowing so much that I have no choice but to give my love to other people that's overflowing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to. So I have a little note here. I just want to read this in response to agape love, which is God's love for us, our love for our neighbor, and flowing back to God. In the book of 1 John, not the Gospel of St. John, but the book of 1 John, which is one of the letters in the New Testament, in chapter 4, it reads this, and this has direct, what do I want to say, a direct link to what we're talking about in terms of agape love. It says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. We love because God first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his sibling, he is a liar. For he who does not love his sibling, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from God: whoever loves God must also love his sibling. And it's not just talking about sibling like your biological sibling. That's talking about the neighbor, the one who's in community, the one who sits in the pew next to you at church. So calling us that we love because God first loved us, which is eros love. It's unconditional love that God has for us. And when we love, we see God in other people, in our neighbor, and that love goes back to God.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I love that passage from 1 John.
Yeah. So we went through the 4 Greek words for love. So the main thing is, remember, in the New Testament, we can't just read it through our lens of like, oh, love is love. There's 4 different kinds of love. And let's focus on this word agape, because I have 2 interesting things to say. Actually, 3 maybe. So William Tyndale, he's one of the first people. I love William Tyndale.
Old Billy Tyndale.
I love William Tyndale because he was foundational in the history of the church, but also he was not a major theologian. He was an English person. He studied language. And sometimes when I enter the world of religion and theology, I feel like, oh, I don't have my MDiv, I don't belong here. But then I think, no, there are plenty of people who helped shape the church who did not have advanced degrees in theology. They studied language, because language is just as much part of this conversation as anything else. Right?
Oh, right, and there's theologians of the church that are also not ordained people.
Right. Exactly.
They're not ordained pastors.
Yeah.
They're not even deacons.
Yeah. I feel like if I give it 20 more years, I will really start to identify as a theologian, because whenever you start to like explore language and biblical language and church language, you end up finding yourself operating like a theologian very quickly.
Yeah.
It's all theology. Okay. So the word agape was sometimes translated into English as charity. Not love, but charity. William Tyndale, he's one of the first people who translated the Bible into English, and he was killed for it. He translated the Greek word agape as love rather than charity. And you might think, who cares? This was a big deal, and it's one of the reasons he was killed, not only by the church, but also by the king.
The King of England.
The King of England, yes. Sorry, I'm trying really hard not to cough. So when he decided to translate this word agape as love rather than charity, this was seen as emphasizing an inner emotion rather than an outward action. So if you think about the word love, you think of something that happens inside and it's kind of pushed outward. When you think of the word charity, it's something that's kind of measurable and you can see it on the outside, right? At the time, Roman Catholics really focused on works, charity, indulgences, prayers, all that kind of stuff as a means of salvation. So they obviously did not appreciate this translation. It undermined their authority. They wanted people's charity because charity in many ways meant they had to give money to the church.
I was just going to say that. It's very, very important that during...
There's nothing wrong with charity, but for this time... Go ahead.
Well, right, there is nothing wrong with charity. Actually, charity is a Christian virtue. And one of the Christian virtues. And charity can be connected to money, but also charity is acts of deeds and goodness and thoughtfulness with no exchange of monetary means. However, what the medieval church was doing, especially in the High Middle Ages, was they were connecting acts of love and charity with purgatory, number one, in which you could pay and help people get acts. So if you did acts of kindness and paid for different things in the church, then your loved ones from purgatory would be get a little time off. So the idea that charity had to be connected with money a lot of times in the Middle Ages was why many of the Reformation theologians, including Tyndale, really, really pressed upon charity cannot always be connected to money. Christian charity is out of the love of one's heart in which they serve the neighbor, not connected to money. But it was so connected to money that when Tyndale was translating that, he thought, no, it's the action of love that brings about charity, caring and loving and aiding a person in need, regardless of giving any funds. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So
it makes sense that
it does.
He would focus on love instead of charity, because that whole word was so wrapped up in the medieval church.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the four Greek words for love. We talked about William Tyndale. I want to talk about the word love in Deuteronomy, and I want to talk about the word love in Peter the Rock. And I know Dillon has some more things to say too. So this word love, you might think like, whatever, there's 4 words of love, but this has really practical, as we can see, it got William Tyndale killed. This word love has practical implications. For example, the word for love in Deuteronomy, when it says multiple times to love your God, it was used in the ancient Near East in a political context, this word love, to describe loyalty to the political party of the day. So once again, we see political lingo being transferred to religious and spiritual contexts. Some people who think the Bible is the inerrant word of God don't believe that translation choices matter. They think like, the way we have the Bible in our hands right now, it's perfect. It can't be argued. But again, some of our Bibles say love, some say charity. And these choices get people like William Tyndale killed by those in power. It matters, right? So we have to wrestle with this stuff. And again, this word love has political context in some places, like in Deuteronomy. You're being told not just to love God, but to love God in the same way you love a political ruler. Again, this kind of like God as anti-politics of the time, of like, don't love your political ruler, love God. Like the way you love your political rulers, actually transfer that to God. I think that's interesting. That's what Jesus was doing with the Roman Empire. Love Jesus, not the emperor.
Well, and just like, it's kind of funny and ironic, but just like today, dear Lord, if you read some of those ancient judges and some of the ancient kings of Israel, and also Mesopotamia and Sumer and other, boy, they were some scary people.
Yeah.
Very scary people.
Yeah. Okay, I have a cough drop in my mouth, so I'm sorry if I'm talking kind of funny, but this is my favorite part. So let's talk about love and Peter the Rock. So remember that the New Testament was originally written in Greek. And the Gospel of John, chapter 21, tells a story about Jesus asking Peter if he loves him 3 times. So Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, of course I love you. And then Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Jesus, of course I love you. And a 3rd time, Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I love you. When we read this in English, it's very weird. Like, does Jesus have some kind of insecurity? Some weird love affair with Peter? Like, what's going on here? But if we read it in its original language, the word that Jesus uses the first 2 times for love is agape, which is the divine and unconditional kind of love. Like, do you love me no matter what? Right? So Jesus, the first 2 times, says, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter responds, yes, but he doesn't say agape. The word for love there is not agape. He says, I phileo you. So that's why Jesus asks a 2nd time, no, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter says, yes, I phileo you. Remember, phileo is the friendship kind of love, not the unconditional, no matter what kind of love. And then the 3rd time, so these verbs, agape and phileo, both mean love, but the verb for love that Jesus uses is different from the one that Peter is using. I hope that, am I explaining that in a way that makes sense? Okay. So, Again, agape means unconditional, and phileo means this like brotherly love between equals. So the first 2 times Jesus says, do you agape me? Peter says, I phileo you. And then the 3rd time, Jesus says, do you phileo me? And he says, yes, I phileo you. So the 3rd time, Jesus meets Peter where he's at. And I think that's so beautiful.
Now, here's an interesting thing about that. If I could.
I have a lot more to say about it, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so it's different, but it's a little bit like this. If Dillon and I weren't married, if we were just dating, and I said, do you love me? And he were to say, I like you. Right? That's kind of what's happening there. It's like, it's a slap in the face. Peter is denying Jesus 3 times. There's some like foreshadowing a little. But he's denying Jesus, and the 3rd time he's meeting him where he's at, right? So Peter is rejecting Jesus, and of course, this is lost in our English translation because we only have one word for all these kinds of loves. But Peter and Jesus are making a distinguishing kind of linguistic point here in this text, which I think is good. Jesus is asking Peter for agape, or unconditional love, which contains within it a loyalty. No matter what happens, you're going to love me, right? And it's associated with the love of humans for God. Peter, however, is unable to express this honestly towards Jesus. Jesus asks him 3 times, do you agape me? And he says, essentially, no.
There's some historical context going on here, which a modern reader would also not pick up on. So you have just beautifully explained.
I love it so much.
You have beautifully explained the textualness of the Greek. What were the exact word choices in the original Greek of that passage from St. John's Gospel? So there's that, and Samantha did a beautiful job at that. This passage is very near and dear to me because it was the gospel passage read at my ordination and installation service. And it is a gospel passage that's read at many pastors and bishops and deacons ordination services and installation services. So this is very near and dear to me personally. An interesting historical context with this passage from St. John's Gospel is that St. John's Gospel is the last gospel that was written, meaning that it is not the oldest, but it is the last. And so it was written in between 90 to 100 AD. So I shouldn't use AD, but after death, that's the old,
BCE.
BCE, thank you. And so, and what was going on in the early Jesus movements there was questions about who is Jesus? Who is this Jesus guy? And so when Peter, when Peter and Jesus are having this conversation, and Jesus is asking him, Peter, do you agape me? That is a direct link to Jesus being both human and divine. That Jesus has the fullness of God in him. So when you see Jesus, you also see God. And Peter didn't get it.
Yeah.
He didn't get it. He didn't get it the first time. He didn't get it the second time. And so what did God in Jesus do? He met Peter where he's at, and he said, I follow you. I have friendship love. He could only in that moment see Jesus as a human teacher. As a person
Is it philo or filio? How do you say it?
I've heard it both ways.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't
keep
really,
going.
And so he could meet Jesus as his rabbi, as his teacher, as a healer, as a leader of this new reform movement. And yet he was not fully recognizing that in the fullness of his presence, he was seeing God incarnate in Jesus Christ. And St. John's whole gospel is about making the point that when you see Jesus, you see the face of God. And so when you look at it in its historical context and in its literacy context in terms of the Greek, you have two things going on there. You see the difference of wording in the textual context of the language. You also see the historic things. The author of St. John's Gospel is making a clear thing and saying, when you see Jesus, you see the fullness of God. And it's interesting because God meets, again, Peter where he's at in a loving, gentle way. And eventually, by the end of it, we see that Peter, he denies him again. And yet at the end, Peter comes to this kind of full understanding of saying, yes, when I see Jesus, I see God.
Yeah.
And in that I experience love for not only God, but love for my neighbor, love for myself, the teachings of Jesus himself.
And this is important for the Christian story because we say Peter the rock is who the church was built on. Well, it started with denying Jesus. That's what it started with.
It's a rock with a lot of cracks in it.
Right, which I think is all right. Again, we're not looking for perfection. Yeah, I think there's some beauty to that. There's an accessibility to that of like, oh, I don't need to be striving and never have doubts and never even deny, because Peter denied 3 times.
Oh, yeah, and more depending
sure,
on
but in this specific story, 3 times. And the 3rd time, Jesus didn't say, how dare you? No, Jesus said, okay, if that's all you can offer me is brotherly love and not unconditional love, okay, I'll take it. All right, I'll meet you where you're at. I'll change my word from agape to phileo. I will meet you where you're at. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And again, when we read it in English, I remember the first time I read this, I'm like, man, Jesus, needy much? I mean, this is weird. You're asking me 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? But do you love me?
It's so odd, weird. Especially in English.
Yes, it's so weird. But whenever you understand the Greek, it's like, oh, yeah, Peter can't give Jesus what he's asking for. Okay, I know.
Yeah, that whole passage is there is so much going on there.
Yeah.
And to the reader, if you just hear it, it sounds like this is really weird.
I have half an hour until I have to leave for my doctor's appointment. So I know you have stuff.
So I just wanted to offer a couple things here in terms of love and care, and we're in the month of February, in which we celebrate on Valentine's Day, and so in thinking about love, I have 2 things that I'd like to offer here. In Holy Week, one of the special observances in the church for Holy Week is called Maundy Thursday. Maundy coming from the Latin mandatum, which is the Latin for mandate, because Jesus mandates 3 things here, and so we call it Maundy Thursday, or sometimes it's known as Holy Thursday, and it's on the Thursday of Holy Week.
Which, really quick side note, our first daughter, Tabitha, we found out that we were pregnant with her on Maundy Thursday. So every Maundy Thursday, I think about that.
Yeah, and the beauty of Maundy Thursday is threefold. The gospel passage for Maundy Thursday in Holy Week is always the gospel passage from St. John's Gospel. And St. John's Gospel offers 3 things in which it records that some sayings of Jesus. Number 1, that Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. And so out of an act of love and kindness and humility, Jesus isn't sitting there on a throne wanting to be served, but Jesus, out of love and care for those around him, washes the feet of his disciples as an act of love, as an act of love, which would be a type of I'm going to say it wrong. Filio, love.
Listen, I don't know if we're saying it right.
It doesn't really matter.
We're getting the point across.
But anyways, so he does the feet washing. And then and then the feet washing comes the meal itself, the Holy Communion, the Eucharist, and he invites all to the table, and he shares this meal of bread and wine, and while they're sharing the meal of bread and wine, Jesus is recorded in John's Gospel to say, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you, and the Father loves us all. So Maundy Thursday is the whole I love kit and caboodle. The whole kit and caboodle of Maundy Thursday is, sometimes in the church people call it the Day of Love, in which we care for others through feet washing. We welcome all to the table of bread and wine and communion to remind us that we're forgiven and to renew us to serve others. And then that great commandment, usually the one that is never really talked about on Maundy Thursday, is I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you.
There's even more there, though. I don't want to take too much time, but there's even more there than you're saying. Like foot washing, you use the word humility. I think of vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability.
Love requires, I'm going to say this again, love requires vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of theologians have said this. This isn't just me coming up with it, but we don't have an all-powerful God. We don't. That doesn't work. If we had an all-powerful God, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. It's not an all-powerful God. It's an all-vulnerable God who meets you in brokenness. There's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And we could talk about that for many episodes. But the foot washing, I mean, if you've ever washed someone's feet, if you have ever washed somebody who is sick or aging, who you have to take care of and wipe their butt, or a baby, you know how humiliating comes from the word humble.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't just mean like embarrassing and grossed out. Humiliating can be a beautiful thing. It makes you your rightful size again. And what a gift to be reminded that I'm not in charge and I'm one person and I'm part of a bigger thing. That's like the foot washing is this like huge thing that breaks it wide open. Welcoming all to eat, like coming to the table on Maundy Thursday, the Last Supper. Jesus was eating with people he wasn't socially allowed to be eating with people. He could have been punished. In fact, he was. He was killed for it. He wasn't supposed to be doing that. It was dangerous. Love can be dangerous. And I think that's important right now to say, just in our current political climate. Sometimes when you love people, it can be deemed illegal. Sometimes when you love people, it can be seen as dangerous. Yes, Jesus was killed for it. And if we say we follow Jesus, we have to be willing to be punished for loving too.
No, that's beautiful. And I think on Maundy Thursday, as Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples, as he's welcoming these really kind of wild characters to the table of bread and wine, and they're celebrating together, Jesus knows that this new way of living in the world, that he's going to be killed for this. And so he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you, and the Father has loved us all. And in that, when Jesus knows that he's going to his death and he's going to be arrested, the closing of Maundy Thursday, in most liturgical churches, there is a custom of talking about the stripping of the altar, in which everything, the lights go dim and everything is stripped away from the altar. And it calls us in that absence, to respond in love. That even though the one whom we love and follow, who is Jesus, has been taken from us, we're called to love one another and continue the story of Jesus in hope of the resurrection. And so Maundy Thursday, or the Day of Love, as some people call it, as we're talking about love and we're in the month of February and Valentine's Day, we think about those three things that Jesus calls us to. And then my last little point, going beyond love and looking at love on Maundy Thursday, is Valentine's Day itself. Interestingly enough, much older cards and decorations and literature for Valentine's Day used to say Saint Valentine's Day, just like we say St. Patrick's Day. And yet how over the years the saint part of Valentine's Day has been dropped, and we just call it Valentine's Day now. But we only have Valentine's Day because of the historic Saint Valentine himself, who was a priest and then perhaps a bishop in the city of Rome. The bishop part, there's some different historical things that say he probably was a bishop, but maybe he wasn't. We definitely know that he was a priest in the city of Rome. And Saint Valentine lived around the 3rd century, and when he was a priest, Saint Valentine, living in the 3rd century, was living under the Emperor Claudius II. And if you know anything about Claudius II, the Roman Empire, I like that whole thing. I obviously studied that and had to study it in seminary. So Claudius, or Emperor Claudius II, was not a very nice person, and he wanted most of all the male soldiers and people to go into the military. And one of the ways he got them there is he didn't want them to have any distractions. He bribed them with food and travel and all these types of things, and he didn't want them having any distractions. And so Emperor Claudius II in the 3rd century said that when you go into the military, you're not allowed to be married. You cannot be married and you can have no children, right? And so he got all these young men in particular to join the cause and to fight for war and expand the Roman Empire under Claudius. And many people did not want this, and many of these men fell in love with women whom they knew through their own village, and also maybe a nearby village. And so what Saint Valentine did was he would marry these people in secret so that they would be able to have this true connection, this marriage that they always wanted, and be able to serve in the military. And so St. Valentine would come and he would unify people in the eros type of love and unity and connection, and he would marry these people. Well, here's the thing. The Roman Empire got wind of St. Valentine marrying these couples in secret and promoting this type of union and love and marriage. And he also went into jails, and he would share acts of love and kindness with people in prison, and he would provide food for them, and he would write letters to them, giving them hope for the future while they were in prison. And he writes to one jailer's daughter, and who was blind, she could not see, and he writes to her, and he helps her try to overcome that which she was under in terms of being blind.
How does she read it if she's blind?
So someone, supposedly the legend is someone read it to her. And the letter was, he would always sign it, "From your Valentine." And so this whole kind of legend of the Valentine and sending letters and valentines back and forth comes from this letter writing of uplifting people to be able to have a moment in their life of feeling and experiencing love.
Yeah.
And so when you celebrate Valentine's Day or Saint Valentine's Day, that is directly connected to a saint of the church who did great work for soldiers who couldn't get married and wanted to get married, and also for people who needed healing in prison.
Yeah. Well, that's such a good story.
I love how you said, "Well, how did she read it?" That was very.
Well, I could picture somebody listening. I've heard the story before, but I could, if I was listening to this for the first
I should have
time,
clarified
I would think
that.
she's blind and she's reading. What? Okay.
Yeah.
So that story is an example of, I think, when I think about love, kind of in closing here, I have a couple more things to say, but do you have anything else?
Oh, no.
Major?
Mm-mm.
That's good.
No. Mm-hmm.
Love, we think of it as this mushy-gushy thing, but I think we've had enough examples and we could go on and on, but love is a very dangerous thing, That's why people in power try to control it so much. I think about one of the greatest human tragedies of known history, which is the transatlantic enslavement, right? Slave trade of Americans bringing Africans here and enslaving them. What is one of the things we did to control people, especially women, is we took their babies. White people took their babies from them, and that's how we kept them in line, right? We control that love, that storge kind of love. Friendships, filio, that's also a love that's been controlled and politicized. Right now, today, in 2025, in parts of the Middle East, the Taliban has made it illegal for women. It's already illegal for women to show their face in public. Now they aren't even allowed to speak to other women. So they've made filio, friendship love, this sisterly love, illegal because they know how powerful that kind of love is. We think of gay marriage and how that's up for grabs, which is just crazy, right? Again, this eros love be made illegal, right? People in power keep making love illegal in all of its different ways. That's a problem. To love unconditionally, no matter what, is actually one of the most radical and dangerous things that we can do in the face of oppression. It's not an accident that marriage, that friendship, that parenthood, that we're separating parents and children, right? Because we know if we want to control the masses, what do? We come after their love. We systematically make it so their love is illegal, that it's a problem. That's crazy. So even when they're trying to take our love, we say no, and we're going to love anyway, and we're going to love louder and bolder, and in public, we're going to love.
Yeah, and love is in all the world's great religions, and yet Samantha and I are both practicing Christians. I'm a Christian pastor, obviously, and Samantha is a professor, and she studies Christian language and literacy,
and I'll say I identify as a Christian.
Sure, absolutely.
I claim that.
And yet, so I want to be pluralistic and inclusive, that yes, all the world's great religions offer and share the love of God. For Christians, when you look at the teachings of Jesus, in whom Christians believe has the fullness of God, and you respond to Jesus's love and teachings in life through the Holy Spirit, who is also God. There is no way around, both in the scriptures and outside of the scriptures, that the Christian tradition, that the Christian religion is not centered on love of God, neighbor, and self, period. Maybe even an exclamation point. If you find yourself a practicing Christian and not radically loving God, neighbor, and self, and it doesn't say love the neighbor who only does this or only does that or only looks like this or only speaks like that. No, it says love the neighbor. So when you find yourself, like I do sometimes, struggling to love or respond in love to people who are very different from us, we are then struggling both individually and collectively to follow the teachings of Jesus.
I'm going to be saying this for many episodes, but please go back and listen to our episode on kenosis, because for me this changed everything. And Nadia, so the Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber, she's really good at talking about this. If this feels like a lot of ladder climbing... And
she's Lutheran.
She's a Lutheran pastor, yes. This might feel like, I just don't know how to love these people. I mean, me too. I'm not walking around like some holy roller loving everybody all the time.
Either.
Good God.
No,
I'm annoyed at half the people I meet, and I'm... But you know what does help is for me to recognize, you know what? I don't have to love everybody perfectly because God already does.
That's good.
And then the parts of me that make it difficult for me to love others, as soon as I acknowledge, oh, but God loves them perfectly, parts of my ego fall away, and I don't have to do anything. If I just am awake to God's love for everybody, even the people I find so annoying, if I just acknowledge, but God loves them, and God made them, and God loves them in a way that I can't, then strangely I can love them too. It's very strange, and it's not always in a moment. Sometimes it takes many months for these parts, or maybe even years. It's this ongoing parts of me falling away. But you know what I mean? You know, and this is kenosis in action.
So could I
Go ahead.
Could I close out with this one?
Well, I have another thing.
Well,
to say
not close out, but
yeah,
just with my comments. So Samantha and I watched just last night. I think it's somewhat of a newish movie.
I think it came out like last year.
It came out like last year. It's called Conclave, and
you loved it.
Oh my God, it was so good. Obviously, we're not Roman Catholics. It was about the Roman Catholic Church, though, and about the conclave. And the conclave is when all the cardinals of the Catholic Church come together when a pope has died to elect the next pope, who governs the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican City. And so we watched this, and great actors and actresses were in it. It was a lovely movie. But at the end of the movie, so the premise of the whole movie is, I think, a beautiful act of love and generosity that God shows us, especially in Jesus through the Holy Spirit. And so the Pope dies, all the cardinals come together in Rome for the conclave. They're all in prayer and thought and smoking cigarettes and drinking wine and eating together and doing all kinds of things. The Holy Spirit is definitely moving there. And yet there's some infighting. There's the conservatives and the liberals and the moderates and who's going to be the next pope, right? And this individual archbishop comes in who is a cardinal, and he's not very well known. And they kind of are apprehensive of him first because he's so not very well known. And then he has this beautiful, wonderful speech, and things happen. You got to watch the movie. It's wonderful. And at the end of the movie, this person is elected pope. And
spoiler alert.
And the spoiler alert of it is, I don't want to spoil it for you, but
you already did.
Well, this individual, I'm just going to spoil it because I think it's so good. This individual who was elected pope went to seminary, became a priest, was ordained a priest, and then ordained a bishop, and then an archbishop, and became a cardinal. So he went through the many levels of the Roman Catholic Church. And while he was in surgery for getting his appendix out in his 30s, the story tells, it was found that he indeed was born with a uterus and ovaries. Now, that complicates things for the Roman Catholic Church, who only permits biological males to the priesthood and to be consecrated as bishops and archbishops and cardinals. So this man was...
he was unaware of his ovaries whenever he was in seminary and became a priest and then became a cardinal. He was unaware. And now he's pope.
And now he's pope. And so I bring that up. And then there was conversations. Well, do you have laparoscopic surgery to have that to have those parts removed, to do all this? And it was a beautiful thing at the end, because he said in much more eloquent words than this, but no,
I know how to live between the categories.
I know how to live between the categories of certainty, and I am going to live the way that God made me. And the beauty of that and the love of that is, this individual, as a child of God, was responding to the love that God gave them, being a part of the church, serving the church as a priest. And
that's such a good segue into what I want to say
right
next.
And so this idea that love is rigid and love can only be for these people and not those people, that we can only love God in this certain way and not that certain way. We have to have, when we love ourselves, it has to be the agape love, the unconditional love that God gives to all God's children, God's creation. Is that movie was so profound.
Yes. Well, that's a good segue into the last thing I want to talk about, which involves the Trinity, which I know you'll have a lot to say about. And then we'll end so I can go to my doctor's appointment. But we love our categories, but let's talk about the Trinity. God, Jesus, Spirit, or Father, Son, Holy Ghost. There's a lot of ways you can refer to it.
Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer.
Father Richard Rohr says, and a lot of people have said this, but when we say God, that's just a word for everything. God is everything. When we say we love God, we love everything because God's in everything, through everything, around everything. Like it's everything. It all belongs, in other words. All of this belongs, and we're obsessed with like categories and all of this stuff, right? But this capital L love is the thing that binds everything. It is the thing that keeps it going forward. We mean something much larger and more expansive than our categories could even begin to. I know I'm getting really kind of metaphysical here, but it's everything.
Well, and
so go ahead.
Yeah, and for those who are thinking that we're getting a little pantheistic,
I knew you were going to go there.
no, well, because someone might be thinking, oh, why? Well, then what's the difference of
Go ahead.
this or that? So what so pantheism means that God is in everything, but does not yet necessarily transcend.
God's not the tree.
So
We're not worshiping a tree, right?
Well, no, but
You've hit a nerve because this is the thing. I just don't even care about the semantics. When people are like, well, God's not the tree, don't worship the tree. I'm like, oh, give me a break. I'm not worshiping a tree. But even if I do, who cares? Because God is everything. It's all part of it. And Dillon gets so hung up of like, no, we don't worship the tree.
Well,
okay, go ahead.
That's more of a So there's pantheists that believe that God is. She's laughing at me so much right now. That God is literally everything. And then there's panentheism, which means that God indeed is amongst everything and yet transcends everything. So God is both in and beyond.
We're getting really philosophical here because God is not the tree, but God can be found in the tree. I mean, we're really,
Absolutely.
I mean, this is so, it sounds like, what are you saying? But like, so my second-born, I feel like I talk about my firstborn a lot, Tabitha, my second-born, Sophia, she is not me, but parts of me can be found in her. She has my DNA, right? So there's
yet also she transcends even beyond you into something totally new.
Exactly.
And so,
yes.
So that's why the
just to ground it a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. So I want to talk about the Trinity because I know we've been gone for a while. Okay, let's see if I can explain this because I part of me wants to call it quits because we've thrown so much at you, but then I think no, this is our podcast. It can be 4 hours long for all I care.
Oh Lord.
It won't be because I have to go to my appointment. So here's the thing. Let's talk about the Trinity, this Trinitarian philosophy that a lot of great philosophers and theologians write about, right? Let's talk about love. When two people turn towards each other in this loving way, there's always a third thing that gets created. Always a third thing that gets created. So hang in there with me, right? So this is literally true when two people who love each other have a child. A third thing is created and they turn their attention toward this third thing and they love this third thing. Love cannot sustain itself if it's just two people looking at each other. And obviously children are not the only or even the best example of this. Some couples, they have pets, right? They get a dog and they turn their attention together to the dog. Some couples, they run. They turn their attention towards training for a marathon together and they run together, right? They turn their attention towards skiing together regularly and passionately. Or two friends bond over a shared love of reading. Or, I know this sounds silly, hang in there with me, but this is a truth when you look around. Love always creates a third thing. There's like this space between that needs to be filled between two people. And we know this in our bones. We know this. Here's what I mean. Do you know whenever you know two people who just started dating each other and they keep looking at each other and they just love each other and they're looking and gazing in each other's eyes and right? It gives you the ick. It's like, please, good God, stop it already. We know there's something wrong. Like we know that you start there. Love starts there. Love starts, you're looking at each other. But there has to be a third thing because without it, it's gross. We know it in our bones that there's something wrong about it. You know what I mean? When two people
I do.
Just like look at each other, they love each other, and then they don't look outward together at all. It's weird. there's something like not right about it if it keeps going. It's like,
correct.
okay,
That can't only be the thing.
Right.
Or things will start to...
Right.
Yeah.
So, this is the truth of the Trinity in action, right? So, like, think of the Trinity: God, Jesus, Spirit, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, however you want to think about it, right? If it's just God and Spirit, this is incomplete because there's no physical matter involved. There's no physical matter. Are you done with your coffee? Because our dog's about to drink
Yes.
it. Okay. So if it's just God and Spirit, this is incomplete because there's no Jesus, which is like the stand-in for all of human consciousness, right? So there's no third thing. It doesn't make sense. It also can't just be God and sorry, our daughter just walked in. I'm losing my train of thought. It can't just be God and Jesus either, because then there's no Spirit to help animate Jesus, right? Like, God is oneness, Jesus is human consciousness or like physical matter, right? And Spirit is the thing that animates it all. It's all the same expression, like they're all expressions of the same thing. I hope this is making sense. But you need all three of them to be in relationship with each other to keep things moving. If you just have two, it doesn't make sense. God and Spirit without humans doesn't make sense. Without Jesus, it doesn't make sense. God, I mean, I could just keep going with all the pairs of these. But do you know what I'm saying?
I'm really loving your Trinitarian theology explanation.
Yeah, you need all three. This is love. It's vulnerable, it's a risk, it's dangerous, but you need three things. You see it all the time in friendship and every kind of love. There's a third thing that takes shape. Whether it's love of a pet, love of a child, love of something together, a shared interest, right? There's this third thing that gets created. That's how we co-create with God, right? There's truth in this Trinity philosophy of like, oh, we're constantly creating. Anytime we turn towards each other, right? A church, we love each other. What gets created when we love each other? Inevitably, we get together, we have ideas. Oh, we should do a food pantry. Oh, we should collect food for people in need. Oh, I heard that people need diapers. We should get them diapers. Oh, I heard, right? Like when two people or a group of people turn towards each other, no matter what, a third thing gets created. I have some friends. We all like to read. We started to talk to each other. What gets created? A book club. Oh, I have an idea. Let's create a book club. This third thing gets created. When people turn towards each other in love, a third thing gets created. When God and Spirit turn towards each other in love, Jesus gets created. Humans get created. Nature, I don't want to say nature because we are part of nature, but creation gets created, right? So we are co-creating with God. I get really excited about this.
The beauty of the love of the outpouring and infilling love that comes from the Trinity is so beautiful in that sometimes the Trinity is seen as water, and the water is one source. There is water, but water flows, flows,
Yes.
and when we know that there's flowing water, we know that there's life there. It's creating life, and yet we also need something solid to walk on, and so we get the ice, right?
Yeah.
And then also the Spirit surrounds us. When you walk into the vapor, when you walk into the steam of the water that's coming, it is literally all around you, and you're in it. You're just in it. And so that oneness, and yet that three all together shows a love that just walks with you throughout your whole life.
Yes. And the kind of like mathematical equation that isn't really mathematical is when we receive love, we then receive the gift to be able to love. So we need to experience love in order to love, right? Which is, again, the Trinitarian thing, the kenosis thing. C.S. Lewis, so these are just my last few things, and then we're going to end. C.S. Lewis says that love is a heavenly element, and only what is heavenly can enter heaven. When shaken, all else falls away. I love that quote, right? Like, love is a heavenly element, and only what is heavenly can enter heaven. So when we are shaken, right, this is why there's often such deep love on the other end of suffering, right? Like when two people suffer together, there's this like potential for really deep love because everything else gets kind of shaken away in the suffering. And if we surrender to it, it can shake us free of everything that is not love. So love is the animating force of everything, which is another like right? Just fill it in with God. God is the animating force of everything. This capital L love, this agape, this unconditional. A human child cannot survive without somebody loving and caring for them. This is also love in action. It's not just, so I'm going to end with this. We often hear survival of the fittest. You can also be seen as survival of the nurtured, right? Only what is loved survives. So we'll end by saying, pay attention to what you love, because what you love is what you feed, and don't be surprised if what you feed grows, right? Sometimes people are so surprised that they're so angry all the time or whatever. Sometimes even myself, I'm so like, oh my gosh, why am I so angry? Well, because I've just spent 2 months feeding the anger. I keep logging online and looking for things that make me angry. I'm feeding it. So pay attention to what you give your attention to, because our attention is connected to what we love, and what we love is what survives. It's survival of the loved. It's survival of the nurtured. Okay, there we go. So that's episode 20. Have a good week, everybody.